Many of us, perhaps old enough, know about the story of four Asian tigers: Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan. Since the 1960s, these nations' economies are the ones among the fastest growing economies. And among those, Singapore is the smallest in area and in population. And Singapore is the poorest in terms of resources. However, against all the odds, Singapore has pulled ahead of the other three since 2005. As of today, if you look at the GDP per capita, the one for Singapore is roughly at 1.5 times of Hong Kong and 2.5 times of Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. So Mr. Philip Yeo's leadership in EDB as well as Instar coincided with the growth of Singapore's economy. I think it's fair to say Mr. Yeo has played a critical role in shaping Singapore's growth and defining Singapore's identity. So my first question is, in retrospect, what do you believe Singapore has done right to pull ahead? And what is the one thing that you're most proud of?
Well, if we compare Singapore with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea, we are quite different economies. I think of the four countries in terms of industry, Singapore is the most open. Unlike Taiwan and Korea, they are basically domestic companies. Now, Singapore doesn't have the population base nor the resources. So from Singapore, it's always been inviting investors. As far as we're concerned, is local industries are not strong. Singapore was set up as a trading nation. We buy and sell, import and export spices and materials. So when the government decided to industrialize, Dr. Goh, my previous boss, in 1961, we focused on industrial development. But the idea is that industrial development creates jobs. But unlike the other countries of Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong in a different case, we invite investors. We allow investors to own 100%. We invite investors to bring the management. We invite investors to bring intellectual property. And the most important, in the markets. The benefits for Singapore's employment. So over the last 30 years, especially I joined EDB, alone in EDB in 86. I spent my early career, 15 years in defense. 86, I came over EDB, economy was in trouble. We have grown very fast. Our challenge basically is how to sustain our growth. Where today, our manufacturing share is about 20% of GDP. That's a very respected number. Hong Kong's share of manufacturing GDP is 1%. Korea and Taiwan are both close to 25-30%. So notwithstanding our limited population, we are still continuing to grow. And the key for Singapore is the government is very focused. Our job is to provide infrastructure, the education of our young people, and an open market. And that's how we have prospered.
Thank you. So to look back, you've created many engines for Singapore's growth. So you can think about disk drives, semiconductor, petrochemical, and then more recently, medicine. And on top of that, you've created the so-called the second wind of Singapore's growth. So you can think about, many people knew about it. I think the conversation before the talk mentioned Batam, right? So that's the one in Indonesia, Wuxi Singapore Industry Park, and the Bangalore International Tech Park in India. So here's my question. Today, if you were to build a very bold new project anywhere in the world, in any sector,
That's a tough question.
what would be your choice and why?
The key, I've been helping since 2006 or 7. I've been helping Saudi Arabia because I got friends for Aramco there. I've been helping Kazakhstan since 2013. Every country is different. So we really cannot transplant our approach. So I work with the Ministry of Industry in Saudi Arabia, Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Defense. I work with the Kazakh government, equivalent of EDB and GIC together. The key challenge is the political leadership. Second, you must have the bureaucrats to execute. The key success of Singapore is execution. Many of these countries hire consultants, advisors. In fact, the consultants also Zoom with me. The key is not idea, the key is execution. And what we have done in my generation, we execute. So when I first crossed over to EDB 86, when I was doing a good job in defense, I was permanent secretary at the age of 32 in defense. The economy went down 85. I came over EDB on loan. I remained on defense payroll until 1999. So I've never left defense technically. And I focused on what are the industries I can attract to Singapore that can create jobs. So I started with disk drive. In those days, the disk drive, 10 megabit, that's it. It's a 5.25-inch chunk of metal. Today, the disk drive industry is all solid state. Then I moved into semiconductors because you need semiconductors long before anybody talk about it in a serious way. So Singapore is a major producer of semiconductors, not the top end, but for everyday use. Then I said, okay, now we have refinery. Refinery doesn't add value. So why don't we go down to petrochemicals? Then we developed Jurong Island at a cost of about $6 to $7 billion. This year is the 25th anniversary of Jurong Island. So we're having a dinner. Then I moved into pharma because in pharma industry, we don't produce generics. No Panadol, no cough mixture. Every drug we produce is proprietary, and the majority of the drugs are cancer drugs, and we export around the world. In a good year, subject to less tariff, we export about $25 billion of drugs. So we are a major drug center. But I was not satisfied with just production. I wanted to go into development. So I created the A-Star Scholarship, where I send out young people. Today, I have trained 1,800 PhDs, all Singaporean, half boys, half girls, two groups, all right? Biomedical group, 65% girls. Engineering group, 70% boys. So, and there are another 500 are still under training because the program is 3 years undergrad, 1 year of lab, 5 years of PhD, 2-3 years postdoc. It takes about 12 years to train a scientist. This is not an AI job. This is really a long term. And then I have young people. I send about 30 young people to UK, especially to do MBBS, PhD. They have a medical degree and a PhD, which means they're training about more than 12 years. At the age of 35, they are already professionals. And then we grow from. So how do I transfer this idea to other countries? It's not easy. So I have same request from Saudi Arabia. I work with the ministers there. I work with Kazakhstan. They have to find their own solutions. Secondly, they have to find someone like me to execute. And that is a challenge in most countries. They don't have good executors. They have a lot of consultants, they spend a lot of money, but and the government, political leaders are very keen. We want to diversify for oil and gas in Saudi Arabia. I want to diversify for oil and gas in Kazakhstan. But where do you find the people to execute? And that is a challenge in any country, finding people to execute.
I've been traveling the world lately, trying to kidnap people. Exactly what you do in terms of faculty members, trying to get the best students from around the world. So when I travel, I tend to brag about Singapore. So there are a few things about Singapore that is very unique. One is we're a trusted party of all countries, and we are very inclusive. We're open to do business. We're welcoming every single one. And we can execute not only in the short run, but also in the long run, right? So when you started A-Star in the early 2000s, I remember the question for you is, when would you see any results? What did you answer that question?
Well, when I started the biomedical research, not manufacturing. Manufacturing can start a factory in 5-7 years. Well, for research, it takes about a decade, 12 years. So many people, where's the Nobel Prize? Nobel Prize are not created overnight. Most Nobel Prize winners are in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Very rare. The only Nobel Prize winner who received the Nobel Prize at the age of 36 was David Baltimore, good friend, just passed away. Most of the Nobel Prize winners are there. So Singapore must understand it takes decades to train scientists. And as far as I'm concerned, we now have 1,800 PhDs, all Singaporeans, boys and girls. Whether there'll be a future scientist, I'm not sure. My main concern is, can we develop new drugs, new treatments in equipment or in medicine for treatment of patients? So the most important is not what we do in research. How do we bring research into the hospital, into patients? And why now, when I visit the hospital, sometimes some of the doctors say, Mr. Yeo, I am one of your scholars, MBBS, PhD. So, there are more than 3,000 of them. So I see outcome as a long term. Maybe someday one of my scientists will become Minister of Health.
I think that's what I'm really proud of. In Singapore, we're predictable, which is a great thing today because many things are not predictable. As well, we're agile in terms of plan ahead, right? So how to rotate industry? How do we sustain growth? How can we keep the jobs, keep creating jobs? That's what you've been doing for the past 50 years. And that's very unique about Singapore relative to many other countries in the world. So today, many things happened. We talk about AI, we talk about technology. These are changing the very definition of jobs every single day and challenge the skill sets we have. Climate risk. The climate risk threatens the very existence of Singapore because we're at the sea level. On top of that, geopolitical risk, tensions between the big powers, right? These are all making today's world very complex. And in many ways, chaotic. So I have a phrase, listen carefully. Predictable unpredictability. So all you can predict is unpredictability. That seems to become the new reality. So here are my questions. Because of this unpredictable world, how does this world change? This one is very big, but how countries across Southeast Asia that face many challenges from tariffs to supply chain shift, how do they cope with such challenges? And the last one along the line. So what strength you believe Singapore still has? And what are the risks we should watch out given today's environment? Thank you.
If you read the news every day, what we have is a situation where there's no more globalized economy. You have America that is very determined to bring back manufacturing. What has happened is now America has a basic minimum tariff of 10%, and then some higher. What we see in Singapore as a small nation, we see there's a potential for us to work with our neighbors, ASEAN, because we have a sizable population here, different levels of economic growth, that we believe we can work together. In fact, in ASEAN, we have a free trade among ourselves. So in a sense, if we have to find a way to live in a world where it's no longer a global single economy, we have to work. So now you notice that we have also the tie with Europe, the tie with Japan, we are well established, with South America, with Africa. So the future leaders, economic leaders, are thinking how to totally diversify. In the past, we just manufacture, export to the US, export to Europe, and Japan. Now the situation is very different. Every opportunity for us is to open new markets. And the challenge for us, in at least my colleagues in government, is we send our officers out. So now in EDB, we have officers around the world. But when I last finished with Spring Singapore, Enterprise Singapore, we have now officers in Africa, in Latin America, obviously India. So our political leadership have realized that we live in a very diverse world, no longer a predictable world, politically, and but also in terms of staff and education. So one of the things I advocate to my colleagues in government that the biggest neighbor for Singapore is really two big neighbors. One is Indonesia, 270 million people. And I believe our young people should learn Bahasa. I mean, it makes sense. I go to Jakarta, they speak to me Bahasa, I can understand, but not good enough. The second biggest market is Vietnam. Interesting, in Vietnam, it's all English focused now. So I brought 500 young Vietnamese students to Singapore in 2005, 2006. I brought them at Sec 3. I funded the education until A level. They are free to stay, or they can join my scholarship. And out of the 500, I only selected 7. And I sent them to overseas for bachelor's, PhDs. All 7 are now Singaporeans, all MD, PhD. Of the 7, 6 girls, 1 boy. Interesting. Which means Vietnamese girls are smarter. No, but it's true. But then, what realized that most of the Vietnamese students after the A level, there are 2 candidates in particular I knew. I gave him the certificate IB program of SGI and also NUS High School. One got a scholarship after our A level, perfect score, from Harvard University, free scholarship. He went to Harvard, is on to PhD. The other boy got a scholarship from MIT, computer science. He now works in Silicon Valley, visits me now and then, and brings me some goodies from Vietnam. So even though the scholars are funded by us, not all will stay, but the links are there. So one of the complaints, oh, why are you all funding all the foreigners? Look, what I am bringing is also not just talent, but I bring competition for young people. And they set the standards. The Vietnamese kids, Monday to Friday, they school, they stay in dormitories, work very hard. Saturday, Sunday, they study. Perfect scores. Without Singapore, they are not going to MIT, Harvard. And that's the key. So for us in Singapore, we need to have more talent. Our limit is not ideas. Where do we find the talent? So we have students. In my scholarship, I attract students from Malaysia, Vietnam, India, and China. And now, after their bachelor's degree, I send for a PhD. After PhD, they get Singapore citizenship automatically. That's the best way of kidnapping.
So to some extent, being resources poor and being small forced Singapore to be open and to integrate the neighbors into the bigger economic zone and to absorb the talent from outside Singapore. So to some extent, we literally turn the disadvantage of a city-state into our big advantage over time. Then my question is, I think this is truly leadership. This is vision, right? So my next question is along the line of leadership. I know many people who are familiar with you call you doing things unconventional and have sometimes mad ideas, right? Including you reclaim the Jurong Island and sell the island underwater to those large multinational companies. So now I'm going to ask you, how do you really turn those mad ideas into actions? How do you trade off risks and opportunities when you convert those bold ideas into real execution or real actions?
Well, to me, the ideas are not mad, not risky. There's no choice. If we depend on just oil refinery, petroleum, import from Middle East, we produce petrol, kerosene for aircraft, there's not much added value. So to go down added value, we need two resources. One is sizable land. We don't want to put the chemical project on the main island. It's dangerous for housing population. So you must find a place offshore. Secondly, it must be big enough that you can accommodate a critical mass. The critical mass is 3 or 4 crackers. One cracker is 1 million tons. 3 crackers, 3 million. So you need size. The third is you need to have talent. So the two resources I need. So first and foremost, I got my JCC colleagues. Let's reclaim the island phase by phase. The target to have 3,000 hectares by the year 2025. Actually, we completed by 2,000. Accelerated. Second was, where do I find the chemical engineers? So when NUS, I said, okay, how many chemical engineers are you training? There's only NUS, NTU wasn't training. 48 chemical engineers. I said, I need 400 chemicals a year. So NUS were obliging, start promoting chemical engineers. And surprisingly, most of the students who earn chemical engineering, which is the hardest discipline, are girls. Because the girls think chemical engineering means chemistry. They do not know chemical engineering is not chemistry, thermodynamics, fluid mechanics. That's why most of my staff in EDB in the chemical group are all girls. And my electronics group is all boys. So because we produce 400 chemical engineers a year for 10 years, we became the fastest. None of our neighbor can compete us. And the brightest kids went to there. So what we have is that the idea is not mad, but the fact is we have no choice. We don't go downstream, we have no added value. At the peak of Jurong Island, our total employment was 25,000 people. Not a small job. And our export at the peak, depending on the price of oil, is $100 billion. Most Singaporeans, when they come to Singapore, they see hotel. They don't see the industries, are all hidden away. But Singapore, manufacturing share is 20% of GDP. Employment, of total employment in Singapore in industry, less than 20%. So less than 20%, we produce a big chunk. And don't forget, when you have a manufacturing job, there are multiplier effect. You need logistics, you need finance, in all kinds of services. So without manufacturing, they are not multiplied. In fact, most service jobs have no multiplier. By manufacturing, the multiplier is tremendous. And you require a diverse skills. So we have to diverse into different skills. So what Singapore has done is we know what we want to do. At least my generation, we focus and get it done. And the key for us that by and large, we can execute well. Because the deadline for Jurong Island was 2025. We finished Jurong Island by opening Jurong Island in 2001, far ahead of schedule. I remember when I was up and running, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew one day asked his secretary to come in, and his secretary, Mr. Yeo, Mr. Lee, we would like to ask your permission to visit Jurong Island. Because he didn't know about Jurong Island. So anyway, arranged for a visit. After the visit, he was very happy, sent out a message, we should have a big plaque on Jurong Island, the names of all the people like who built Jurong Island. I said, thank you, we did do it. So the key in my generation, the people asked execute. The political leadership didn't have to just leave it to us. Nobody second guess us. Nobody asked us for writing a paper on Jurong Island. There is no paper on Jurong Island.
That's a good story. So here is a little bit sensitive question. I learned in Singapore, we are often trying to strike an interesting balance between the diversity of ideas and respect of established norms. And you are famous for moving fast and create things, right? While you're moving fast along the way, you do break a few rules and you challenge the very boundaries of the balance we're trying to strike. So my question for you is how today's leader, not you anymore, right? For today's leader, how could they show the same courage while keeping trust and accountability intact?
Well, I wish you tell my officers rules are meant to be broken. No. Rules are necessary to keep things for order. But rules can be an obstacle. The key is you break the rules not for personal benefit, for economic growth, for the country, for people. So long as you break rules, there's no personal benefit, it's not a crime. That's the key now. So the key is that rules are necessary, but we should not stick to rules that doesn't help us. So when we want to develop any project, for example, I wanted to build 25 semiconductor factory, wafer fab. Wafer fab very water intensive. So we set up PUB, said, look, if you ask for 20 wafer fab, you need lots of water for your DI water, DNS water. We cannot supply you with water because you're competing with potable water, drink water. So I got my staff in EDB, we say, set down. So what should we do? We take dirty water, recycle it because the new water. And that most of that new water goes to our industry because new water is pure, no minerals. And that's how, so Singapore was able to build a wafer fab. Today we have only 50, we go 25, is also land demanding. No expense of potable water. In most countries, they use both. So here in Singapore, we use recycled water for industry, which is technically also drinkable, but nobody wants to drink new water, hopefully. So in Singapore, in a sense, my generation, we have to break rules and to PUB to correct. Look, you're asking for 20 wafer fabs. We're competing with bottled water for drinking water. We cannot agree with you. So we switch and we create an alternative. So as far as Singapore, we need people who have to think out of the box. Rules are there, but doesn't necessary. So how to reclaim 3,000 hectares of land? We have to find sand. So we have to find companies who will help us reclaim. And how to reclaim, each phase has to be done in 5 years. So each phase of Jurong Island, about 900 hectares, all done in 5 years. And we were promoting Jurong Island to companies to invest when it's still underwater. So it requires people who are able to have confidence and willing to get things done, not conform themselves to that we must have the land ready before we invite investors. We were promoting investment on Jurong Island, we're still under the sea. So we have a joke, the best song for Jurong Island is Under the Sea.
We need confidence. We need to think outside the box. I think that's probably a key takeaway from this discussion. I learned you've often warned about complacency for new generations and for leaders in business and in government. So the challenge is, what would help leaders to keep a large system but stay fragile? In other words, how can we make sure each generation is creating rather than just maintaining what is already there? How do you view that?
Well, each generation has to find their own path. But I believe the most important each generation, whether we have the hunger and the drive. So my only concern is as the generation become well-fed, well-educated, and not much pressure, that's a worry. But today, to be fair, I have an organization called a PYI Initiative, where I fund students every year, about 5 students from NUS and to a polytechnic, fund them with money to pursue the project. They're so quite keen. So I guess each generation has to find their own dream, their own drive. And I'm quite happy the younger people do that. Obviously, they are lucky because unlike my generation, they don't worry about their parents. Parents support them. Our generation has to support our parents. So the younger generations are now willing to try and do their own thing. But I always tell them the key, you must also go beyond Singapore. You cannot think of ideas and products to serve the Singapore market. There's no market. You must learn to go beyond, first start with ASEAN and then go to the other market. So many of our young people, when they have any ideas, well, where else can you sell this product or service? You cannot focus on Singapore. And that is the key challenge. Our young people must be global. That's why I always kid, they must learn beyond English and Mandarin, another language. And that's very important. For example, in one of my companies I run, I have factories in Penang, 1,800 workers. I have a factory in Suzhou, 400 workers. I have a factory in Thailand, 2 locations, 1,000 workers. So and now we have factories also in Ireland. So we have young people who want to be posted overseas. I don't want them to stay at home comfortably. In fact, the more I go international, I want my young people to go everywhere. So we must have Singaporeans who have that interest to travel, to look for new markets. And I hopefully they will do.
Go beyond Singapore, go outside. I think that's very important. Actually, NBS this year for the first time launched the global NBS Global Leaders Program. So we have 35 scholars and they're already here. We train them in leadership. We will help them find opportunities to do internships in Singapore, in ASEAN, and we're sending them most likely to Berkeley Haas. So hopefully after that, they can find internships with all helps. If you can help, please let us know to find internships in the United States. So this way we can help nurture the future leaders for Singapore. And if we keep doing this year after year, I can imagine in 10 years, we're going to have the leaders for the region. Or if we're really lucky, we do this right, we're going to have the leaders for the world. For the young generation to see the world, to see the future differently than what they always see in the same place is very important. And we all thank you for your investing in talent. And before we started this discussion, you've mentioned one initiative you've started. It's called IDIS Care, EDIS, and you support the young kids. Could you share with us a
EDIS Care, not many people are aware. I found out that in Singapore, there are people in a 1-bedroom HDB flats and they usually have financial difficulties. So what EDIS Care is a arrangement we have to help the education of these young people from baby, with food, milk, but all the way to primary 6. Because I believe a child can cross primary 6 and have a good education, the chances for education there. So EDIS Care takes care of about 300 young kids from broken families. And that is what we have succeeded. In fact, the whole purpose of my book was not for my own biography, was my staff asked me, we want to raise money for EDIS Care. Can we write about you? And that was, okay, you can do anything you like so long we have raised money. So because of the launch of the book in 2016, we raised $770,000 from donations. And after the first 5,000 copies, the SPH is making a lot of money selling all the rest. But we are continuing with this charity because this charity is not just providing money, but we find a mentor for each child in primary 1 to primary 6. And the mentor or mentee must volunteer to spend a whole year, at least a year, to help the child every weekend, because most of the volunteers are young people. On the weekend, they will spend time with the young boy and girl to help them in English and maths, two very important subjects. So when these young people pass primary 6 and get a good score, we are happy that they succeeded. Well, most of these young people come from broken homes. Father could be a drug addict, parents are divorced, father could be also be in prison. So then these kids are brought up by grandmothers. And it's quite a challenge because no much financial help we can give them. The key is to find a mentor for each child. So I'm very pleased that many of the young mentors are also young school kids, secondary school kids willing to volunteer. But each mentor one child for at least 1 year and then renewable. And that is something very labor intensive, we can't multiply. So we kept ourselves to 300. So what my job in my colleague is that the staff is on my payroll. I raise the money for their use. And the money is managed by community chairs. And the community chairs allocate. So every year, I will sit down with five volunteer organizations and say, okay, how can we help your members? And these 5 volunteer groups are also from the prison, from broken homes, what have you. But the key is to find mentors to help them in education. Our hope is that they can help the child cross primary 6, and then the future is open.
Thank you for supporting all those kids. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all people in the audience, all people online who have supported NBS students. I know many of you have served as mentors for our undergraduate students, and some of you have served as mentors for young alumni. Thank you very much. Investing in people is probably the most profitable investment in the world. So I have one more question for you. I know you've talked about your bosses, and you mentioned Dr. Go in many occasions. So the question I have for you is, do you remember any difficult moment with any of your bosses in your career?
By 1988, full employment. So we have a problem because we have enough workers here and they want to import more workers. So I came my idea is how do I move parts of my production chain offshore? Should I move them to Johor? Should I move them to Indonesia? Obviously, Johor is easier, but there was not so much facilitation of transportation. So when the Indonesian ambassador came to see me about March 89, says, how about look at the Batam? And I said, I've never been to Batam. Let me have a look. So I went to Batam. Infrastructure was there, airport was there. So I said, okay, I want a location in the center island near the reservoir. The reservoir was there, 500 hectares, right? So I said, okay, what can I do? I'll produce the components, electronics, Thomson Electric, produce the components in Singapore. Manufacturing, when in production, it's capital intensive. But you still need assembly, you need testing. You can't replace the final phases. So we move, what we do in Singapore, we produce the parts, electronics and other parts, put in a container, 24 container, seal. We transport the container to Batam, my industrial park there. We do the final assembly and seal and export to Singapore direct. So it doesn't enter the Indonesian market. So when I proposed the idea of doing this offshore production, but doesn't enter the Indonesian market, I have to get agreement from the Indonesian government. So the key was I went to see my boss, Dr. Go, who was then chairman MBA. I said, look, I have this idea to move some of my production offshore because I can't get any more labor. And I want to move to Batam. So I brought him to visit. He said, he has a crazy idea, got a lot of transportation problems. And I brought him to the island and said, this is my plan. I want to build an industrial park of 500 hectares. And he says, okay, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'll start work tomorrow. And he says, no, you can't do that. You have to have a G2G. I said, what is G2G? Government to government agreement. I look at him, he look at me, he know I won't write. He wrote down the note after he went office, this is my draft for you. Can you check? He took the draft, written by him, gave to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew flew to Brunei, met President Suharto, and agreed. So you need to find bosses who do the work for you. Now that's one. Two, after I started the construction and I built very fast, in 2 years, Batam Industrial Park, 100,000 workers. Then my greatest ever, if I want to raise funding, for Indonesian, because the land is Indonesian, Singapore banks will not loan Singapore dollar. So doctor was still MAHM. I went to see him and said, "Doctor, I need to raise Singapore dollar for financing this project in Indonesia, which you don't allow because Singapore doesn't allow export of Singapore dollar." So I sat over here in front of him. He says, "Write to me." I look at him, took a note, wrote down, "No, this is what you write to me." So I got my secretary type 3 same letters, same format, $600 million. So you need to find a boss who will write for you.
You've mentioned multiple times you never wanted to be a civil servant. If you think really wildly and creatively, what you might end up being if you hadn't work as a civil servant, what would be your work like?
First and foremost, I went on a scholarship, so I was bonded. Singapore was bond. My bond is 5 years. I worked in defense age of 24. By the time I finished my 4th year, I was director of finance. I was the fastest promoted by Dr. Goh. At age of 26, right? I had a Mercedes-Benz given to me. I was the youngest director. My counterpart was Ms. Anardan, who was 20 years my senior. So I had a good boss. So in a sense, I could have stayed, I could have quit. My original idea was to finish my bond and run and move to the business world, because really I would prefer business. But what Dr. Goh was smart says, okay, you can go to school. I went to Harvard on the US Fulbright scholarship, not funded by government, and I thought it would be free. Then he said, no, we want you back. Vietnam has fallen, 1975, we need you back quickly. So what you have to do is if I have not for Dr. Goh, I would have left the government long ago. That's a fact, right? So in a sense, a good boss not to kidnap people or not to keep people. If a lousy boss, I always tell myself, you cannot choose your parents, you can choose your boss.
That's a really good advice. So now we are going to open the session to questions from the audience.
When people ask me the future of Singapore, I would tell them it's not my problem. It's just jokingly. Because it's hard to see forward. It really depends on present leadership. What I have done is history. What you need is a new generation. Today, they're more focused on intellectual property, AI. So really, it's quite a different thing. But I always tell young people, you need to have a good education that allow you to pursue a broad field. And that is very important because industries will change. For example, when we talk about AI, AI is basically software. But you still need to make products. AI doesn't make a car. AI doesn't make a phone. Use AI to use a software. So you need to have young people willing to learn hardware and software. So the key is to have a good education. Ideally, I like young people to have education where they have hard sciences plus humanities combination, so that we are able to think and write and communicate. So for any leadership, you need to have your education of young people the most important factor. And that's what Singapore succeeded. We are able to educate, we are able to finance the education of young people. So our future really depends. Secondly is that if we want to grow in an ASEAN neighbor, we should try to invite young ASEAN students to come and study in Singapore. Because they may not all stay, but quite percentages will stay. And they'll also bring memories of their stay in Singapore back to countries. And when we want to go into ventures, it's always good to find ex-ASEAN student who have studied in Singapore. That's very important. A good example, the Deputy Minister for Science and Technology in Indonesia is a lady. She's an Indonesian lady. She came to Singapore, she studied at CHIG Toa Payoh, right, on an ASEAN scholarship. Then went to America to a bachelor and a PhD in neuroscience. And she was taken back into Singapore University. And last year, she returned back to Indonesia as a Deputy Minister of Science. She's still a Singaporean. So I communicate with her. She miss Singapore food. So the key is that if we are able to accept talent from our neighbors, be generous enough to give them scholarship here, not just think of our own population, we really can grow. So whether it's Vietnamese students or Indonesian students, Malaysian students will have a lot. A good example, one of the scholars interviewed when I was chairman A-Star, was a little girl, finished at A-level, perfect scores. She lives in Sinai, Johor. She wakes up every morning at 5 o'clock. She takes the bus, which collects all the kids, called Build Run. Come to Singapore to school by 7:30. She did that for 12 years. And every year is perfect score. So I took her in, gave her a scholarship, bachelor, PhD, not Singaporean. So by stealing talent from neighbors, they built our society. I have also a young Sri Lanka girl, came here on our scholarship. She did MBBS, PhD at Imperial College. She's now working in a hospital. So Singaporeans might have big heart enough to take in students of region, add to our population because our population is not increasing, and we grow a stronger Singapore. So a political leadership must be able to tell the people we need to bring in talent to grow our economy. Well, it depends on the leadership. When I was chairman of EDB, chairman A-Star, I always tell my staff, our job is to help companies to grow, whether they are international or local. So really it depends on leadership at EDB or Enterprise Singapore now. I don't think you can blame the officer at the ground. It's the top that set up. So I give an example. In 1986, I was chairman of EDB. In 1987, I set up EDBI in San Francisco, EDBI Investment. I gave my staff based there $40 million to invest, $40 million, 87. My rule was that when you invest in any project, $1 million, write down to 10%. So if I invest $1, I write down 10. The reason was when you invest in project, 90% will fail. So you must plan for failure, so you don't have to blame people or complain or worry, can't sleep. So based on that project, a lot of projects took off. What I noticed today, now they're more risk averse. Everything you calculate, if I put $1, can I get back $2, right? It doesn't make sense. So the key is whoever is a leader or chairman of that agency sets a pace. You can't blame yourself. Well, when I built A-Star, for example, Biopolis, so I was trying to recruit scientists, oncologists, Dr. Ed Liu. He was the deputy director of National Cancer Institute. This was the year 2000, and his budget for NCI was $9 billion. The number one director was David Costner, whom I knew. I couldn't get him, so I took the number 2 Ed Liu. So I offered Liu a job in Singapore. I wrote the memo to him, an email in December 2000. So he asked me, Mr. Yeo, if I come to Singapore to set up your institute for genomics, can I have my own building? I said, sure. He thought I was joking. So based on his request for our building, I built Biopolis. Because if I had to kidnap him, I must deliver. So how do I build Biopolis? I have no budget. I have no land. The land is JTC. So I told JTC, why don't you build this complex for me, designed by architect Zaha Hadid. I want 2 million square feet, at least 7 buildings to 1. You build, I pay rent. So Biopolis is not an A-Star project. It's a JTC. JTC is doing it as a job. So both parties are not wrong. So the government scratched it. How can you have this project built up 2 million square feet, the whole Biopolis? There's no government paper. There's no budget paper. So JTC said we are asked to build by Philip Yeo. Philip said ask you to build. So that's how. So the key is that you need to have leaders willing to break the rules. If you want to write papers, I want to build a Biopolis of 7 buildings, 2 million square feet. You take ages. You go through many ministers and whatever. So JTC, when they were blamed, so after I finished Biopolis, the first 7 billion up. So I said, look, I must have all the engineering group in one location, Fissionapolis. Biopolis opened in 2003, October 2003. Fissionapolis groundbreaking in 2003 July. 2 million square feet, 1 building, underground basement. So there's no, how do I connect basement? So I saw the Buona Vista line, NUS hospital, there's a terminal station. So I told JCC, you build a station here. So then they said, look, we have to get approval of LTA. I said, well, you tell LTA we build a station. So LTA says, well, I got no budget, so we built. And that station is called One North. And we handed over the management to LTA, that was it. And that building again, it's not on any government plan. I got JTC to build an A-Star pay rent. But to make it viable, I also allow in biopolymeric fishermen not only just government labs, but commercial labs located in the same place. So you have commercial labs and public labs in a sole location, they both pay rent. So JCC moved from just building a simple factory into a high-rise research park. And all again, there was no cabinet paper on building biopolice, nor fission police. So the leader at the top sets the pace. If your leader is bureaucratic, then everybody down there is bureaucratic. That's it. So I have no solution for you. I've been to Dubai many times. They also saw my advice. What we have here, we have a population, we have to take care of people. Dubai population are more 90% foreigners. It's a difference. So in a sense, we educate our own people. Dubai doesn't educate these foreigners. I go to Saudi Arabia, 90%. Saudi Arabia has 8 million foreign workers. They have no choice. In Singapore, invest our people. But our people must not think themselves that they must remain in Singapore. They must really get out. So the key for a young generation, and politically, we must always think big. We cannot look at Singapore and look, that's where we are. We have to make friends with our neighbors well, politically, economically, and link ourselves to them. So your leadership must take themselves as big-hearted and big eyes to grow beyond. So the key is the political leaders. My generation, we grew Singapore as best we can. I even moved, so I have said, Bangla IT Park, I said Bangla IT Park 1994. Now we have Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Pune, Bombay. They have something like 25 million square feet of IT space. In Vietnam, I moved to Vietnam 1994. Now VSIP, Vietnam Singapore Industrial Park, there are 20 parks. And you will see, so the key, my generation were able to grow. The key for present leadership, they must learn to grow outside. And that is basically enough. Politically, it's up to them to convince the people. Well, the petrochemical companies, because there's anti-environmental. So I think downstream in Singapore is concerned, we are not in chemical, we are downstream chemicals. And that's still a growing area. So next week or so, we are having the 25th anniversary of Jurong Island. They are working out how to redevelop Jurong Island. Chemical engineering is an area where we use the same skill to produce pharma. So the chemical engineers have all gone basically now in pharma. Petrochemical is still there, but the biggest industry is in pharma area. So right now, I'm still positive. The most difficult discipline in engineering is two areas, chemical engineering and electronics. These are the two most difficult disciplines. And right now in this discipline, you can move to other areas. In fact, most of the scholars with me for chemical engineering in Shell, chemical companies all over the place. If one of my engineers now is running a German company in Dow Chemical, so it's there. When Mr. Chu Rongxi was Prime Minister, he was mayor. I knew him as a mayor of Shanghai, 1989. Then became a minister and became Prime Minister. We used to meet out and check. The two industries that China should pay attention: chemicals and semiconductor. Today they've done it. In fact, I was invited to look for an island developed equivalent of Jurong Island for them. Unfortunately, I say I was quite busy. I moved to A-Star. So what China has done today is the same chemical industry, self-sufficient, crackers, refinery, and semiconductor. In fact, they should have listened to me earlier. Well, to be fair, I've been doing many things differently all the time. So I'm not too sure how. The one area I felt we could have gone further was expanding beyond Singapore as far as I can. The moment I stepped down from EDB and after A-Star in 2006 to 7, we have stopped going globally. All the industrial parks we have today are legacies of my time and my contribution. Batam Industrial Park, Bintang, Wuxi, even Suzhou, which I've rebuilt for them. Anglo, IT Park, Vietnam. Nobody else is doing these things. So my greatest regret, there are nobody else continuing the same expansionist attitude. Most of people are quite comfortable being here, and that is a worry. Don't confuse with education, academic excellence, and entrepreneurship. Let me give you an example. Yesterday afternoon, about 3 o'clock, I have an American neurosurgeon who came to see me. In fact, he asked to see me. I was quite busy. I postponed. So I finally saw him. He says, I said, well, you came to see me. Yeah, in 2006, I was a professor at Stanford University neurosurgeon. And I was considering what should I do. And you were trying to recruit me. He was then 52 years old. He left Stanford, he joined the biggest American Confederation, making all those proton beam. And now at the age of 71, in fact, the last 5 years, he has set up his own company. He's a professor of neuroscience. The university allowed him to take leave to create his own company. He's now selling a new proton beam equivalent of gamma equipment. He has set up one in Europe, Munich. He's trying to sell in Singapore. He's 71. Here is a well-educated man. In fact, he's a very bright guy. I was trying to recruit him. The key is that society, he's a professor at Stanford. He's allowed to take leave to do his own company. Imagine, I don't think many places. He took leave for 5 years, ran the company, and then passed on, then went back. And he still keep their link with the university. So we must have a society where we allow people to move in and out. So when I was chairman of EDB, some of my young scholars come to me, look, when I worked for EDB for 5, 6 years, can I go outside and join a company? I say, go. Because I give them a different side of the world. Then after several years, they can come back. So I would like to encourage the flow of people from public to private. And that's very important. If officers just remain in public and then private, there's no mixing of talent. So what I noticed in America when I'm there, I visit very often, but my son is there, the ability for academic people to take leave, 5 years, 6 years, out, run a company and come back. There's something we have not developed in Singapore. We're quite strict. You're academic, you must be academic. You cannot move out to industry. And there's something that we need to allow the flexibility. No, you know what? China succeeded. Many are bright young people in China, academically, you quit and start a company. So the key is that, but don't forget, most of this, even this professor, his first company, 6 years in a row, failed. Finally had to raise money, finally succeeded. So he still continue. At the age of 21, he has now set up 38 of these super gamma equipment in different countries. He's trying to set up Singapore. He came to see me for advice. Imagine, I was trying to kidnap him in 2006. He's now asking me to help him to establish him. So the key is that we need to allow our talent to be able to be loaned out. And that is something Singapore is quite strict. You're a civil servant. So in my generation, I was both a civil servant plus non-civil servant. I was able to run in the government. I still work in companies, but there's only one pay, my government pay. The moment you break these rules, a civil servant must be a civil servant, have a company, you really break the chance. When I was a civil servant running companies, a very young man, I could see a different world. I have to borrow money from the bank, I have to hire people, sack people, buy equipment, fight unions, deal with unions. You don't have this in government if you're a government officer all the time. Okay? So that ability to allow our people to be multifunction, and that's how we develop our people. My generation was lucky because most of us are multifunction, but we never have conflict of interest. One pay, but freedom to run. I run 5, 6 companies at the same time. I was still in the defense, I was still in EDB, or chairman Sembawang, chairman CapitaLand. A lot of things, but only one pay. I remember someone asked, Mr. Yeo, you must be the highest paid civil servant. I said, why? I said, no, all these jobs are pro bono. I don't think I ask people to change. You yourself want to change. It's a self-driven, When I was in Defense or Economic Development Board, a lot of initiatives I do is on my own initiative. So you don't expect someone to tell you you are free to change. That's, like, ultimately, it's you yourself must want to do some things, and you must also take responsibility if you fail. And most of the people don't want to do it because they're responsible of failure. So the key is that there's no restriction on what you want to do. But I also find that, for example, I support some other companies. Many of the people who are more hungry are polytechnic people, because there's a gap between the pay of a polytechnic and university. And they're more willing to set up companies. So many of the SMEs in Singapore that I am familiar with, chair of EDB and the Spring of the other, actually poly people. So maybe sometimes you are more too educated, you have become too risk averse. What I call ignorance is bliss. Yeah. So and that's one of the worry they have, that more addict of people, they analyze too much, or they generate 10 options. When I want to do a project, I just, yes, I go or don't do it. I don't do any analysis. I just, everything I do, I expect failure, but I must prepare to change quickly, change direction. If I try to analyze, then nothing will be done. The difficulty is that the more you educate a person, the more you worry about all the alternatives, all the possibility of failure. And that is the biggest challenge. The more educated people are, the more risk averse. So maybe you're right.